Hello. Today I'm going to read you a story by Allan Ahlberg, which is illustrated by his wife Janet, and it's called Mrs. Wobble the Waitress. There's a picture of the front cover. There's Mrs. Wobble, Mr. Wobble, and the children. All right, let's see what happens. Mrs. Wobble was a waitress. She liked her work. The customers liked her. The only trouble was she wobbled. One day Mrs. Wobble wobbled with a bowl of soup, and the soup landed on a customer's dog. Mrs. Wobble got told off. The next day Mrs. Wobble wobbled with a roast chicken. The roast chicken landed on the customer's head, and Mrs. Wobble got told off again. The next day Mrs. Wobble wobbled with a plate of jelly, and the jelly landed on the manager's head, and Mrs. Wobble got the sack. Oh dear, there he is, manager, jelly on his head, Mrs. Wobble behind saying, oh dear. Mrs. Wobble went home to her family. Mr. Wobble cooked her tea. The children tried to cheer her up. Cheer up, Ma, they said. You'll find another job in another cafe. But there were no other cafes. That was the only one in the town. Mrs. Wobble knew this. There are no other cafes, she said, and she began to cry. The children did not like to see their mother cry, and it made them cry, and it made their father cry too. Then Mr. Wobble had an idea. I know what we can do, he said. We can open a cafe of our own. Where? Said Mrs. Wobble. Where? Said Miss Wobble. Where? Said Master Wobble. Here, said Mr. Wobble. We can turn the house into a cafe. The next day the Wobble family turned their house into a cafe. They painted and cleaned. They moved their chairs and tables around. They changed the curtains. Oh, look at them working. Oh, well, look at them working hard. And then there's another one there, with the tables and everything. Well, I wonder what's going to happen now. Oh, Mr. Wobble went shopping. He brought meat and vegetables, fruit and fish, cheese and chicken, flour, and a few other things. And the children went shopping too. They bought 2 pairs of roller skates and a fishing net. What are those for? Said Mrs. Wobble. It's a surprise, Pa, the children said. You wait and see. In the evening, Mrs. Wobble made waiters' clothes for the children and a cook's hat for her husband. So getting prepared. And Mr. Wobble and the children made the menus. There's the menu. Look at it. Lots of things on there. Soups, meats, pies, fish, cakes, jellies, puddings, fruit. Oh. The children went to bed. Mr. and Mrs. Wobble stepped outside. They looked at their new cafe. It's a big day tomorrow, Mr. Wobble said. We're going to make our fortunes. Yes, said Mrs. Wobble. The only trouble is, what if I wobble? The next day the children woke up early. It's a big day today, Ma, Master Wobble said, and he gave his mother a cup of tea in bed. Miss Wobble gave her father a cup of tea in bed. We're going to make our fortunes today, Pa, she said. It's a big day. After breakfast, Mr. Wobble began cooking, and Mrs. Wobble and Miss Wobble laid the tables. Master Wobble went round the town with a sandwich board. The first customer arrived. Oh dear, said Mrs. Wobble. What if I... Mrs. Wobble wobbled with her bowl of soup. Help! Cried the customer, and Miss Wobble skated to the rescue. She caught the soup in another bowl. That's clever, the customer said. Mrs. Wobble wobbled with the roast chicken. Wow, said the customer. Master Wobble skated to the rescue. He caught the roast chicken in a net. Hooray, the customer said. Then all the other customers cheered. Hurrah, hurrah! This is more fun than a circus, they said. There's Mrs. Wobble and Miss Wobble catching the chicken. Everyone's so pleased. That night Mrs. Wobble counted the money. It looks like a fortune to us, Ma, the children said. And Mr. Wobble gave them a hug. We owe it all to the famous juggling waiters, he said. The next day there was a big crowd in the street. The people had come from miles around to see the famous juggling waiters. Look, there they are. Everyone waiting. Oh, everyone. The children peeped out. "There's a big crowd in the street, Ma," they said. "Yes," said Mrs. Wobble, and she began to laugh. "Now the only trouble is, what if I don't wobble?" So that's the end of the story. It all ends happily, and they are a success. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.